Ever since the concept of employee engagement got unveiled, it has been the most mystical panacea for all organizational challenges. And I think in the current times, it is even more relevant. Engaged employees and therefore an engaged workplace is in all probability likely to outperform all their business peers, not just in business as usual scenarios, but most importantly in crisis situations. And crisis for business cannot get bigger than what we have just now seen. At the same time, the dynamics of the world that we are working in are very, very different. As we enter the future of work, a couple of things that are clearly impacting employee engagement are: number one, the whole paradigm of employee engagement is based on a work team, a physical office where people meet, greet, be with each other, and therefore a whole lot of positive energy is unleashed. In fact, I remember it was said that a majority of our waking time we spend at our workplace. Now it seems as if it is historical. Now that's not the case anymore. I've not been to my workplace in the last 100 days, and the way situations are, I may not see that for next 50, 60, 100 days. So that is a very important challenge from an engagement perspective. Secondly, more and more work now is happening on virtual teams. It is estimated that 60% of the global projects will now be delivered with virtual teams. And virtual teams don't mean virtual in terms of the placement of workers. Now we are seeing teams getting created with permanent employees, part-time employees, temporary employees or gig workers, freelancers, and even machine employees are now participating in work groups. And that's, I think, one of the biggest challenge. The fourth big challenge around employee engagement currently is that individuals have completely dismantled the concept of role and job descriptions. More and more people are signing up for opportunities where they can decide what they want to do, when they want to do, where they want to do, and most importantly, how much they want to do. And that again creates a very big dichotomy for the manager at large who's trying to be the driver of the engagement bus. And lastly, this whole concept of reward and recognition in this virtual environment has suddenly become alien. I don't think we've reached that stage where we start talking about how do we reward and recognize people, which incidentally continues to be a fundamental human need. So therefore, I use this term mystical panacea for employee engagement. While we all know, and there is data to prove that it works, but it is mystical in terms of the nuts and bolts and the how of it. Now, across Asia Pacific, nobody knows employee engagement better than my guest today, Vikas Chaturveri. In fact, Vikas and I have a great history. Welcome, Vikas. Thank you so much for
Thank
taking
you so
time
much.
out. And I am getting transported back in time. It feels like when was the last time we did a gig together? Because about 12 years ago, 10 years ago,
About 10 years or so.
10 years. I have had the great privilege of being Vikas's best friend at work. And of course, it was mutual. And we had many, many occasions to talk about engagement in real life. So as I said, nobody knows engagement better than Vikas today. It's a privilege that we are having this conversation on this Saturday afternoon. So Vikas, tell me, how relevant do you think is this whole premise of employee engagement in the current context and current time?
Before anything else, Shakun, I think I just want to also go back on the memory lane. We spent many years working together. I think learning about employee science and about people at Gallup, where I work. And I think one benefit of being there for anyone has been access to workplace and life data in general. From the kind of research that we do, you get to understand how people feel at work, how they feel about their life in general, and things that sort of shape their values, their perceptions, their behaviors, even their actions. So
Hmm.
And as Shakun said, I think there's no better time than really a huge crisis like this to really track for what has endured and what has changed. And I think it sets up a very good conversation between the two of us. Shakun has had a even more interesting journey, I think, while I've stayed at Gallup. Shakun has had a very enriching experience in technology and other frontiers too. So I think all those are paradigms that we can talk about as we go along in our, I think, largely friendly conversation around the subject. So, in fact, I have a question or two for Shakun as well. So it's not just
Sure.
me
Yeah.
and what I think is important. I think purely in terms of the relevance of the idea of what Shakun says is mystical, the mystical panacea. I think not just mystical, it's also the other word that we could use is complex because human beings are complex.
Hmm.
And therefore, to unravel or to uncover or unearth things that would be of value is interesting. I think in terms of pure relevance of the concept itself, the idea of employees' engagement at work, what we have, and we've been having these conversations internally with our researchers, consultants, people across industry, people who are experts such as Shakun and several others, is that the human needs tend to endure. So the idea that when if you need, for example, we spoke of best friend, or if you look at ideas like care or recognition, those have all endured, they will endure. It's just that the way they will get interpreted will change. And the other
Hmm.
thing is we have to largely see these as disruptors. And at Gallup, we've actually tracked disruptions right from the time of the Pearl Harbor. So one thing that we can remember, I think, in the course of human history is that this is not the first crisis.
Hmm.
It's not the first crisis, and we've endured several. Of course, each crisis does alter the fabric of life and workplace. For
So.
one point there, I think, Shakun, I just wanted to add, because you spoke of people working remotely, and we've all been around uh, our homes for over 100 days. I think one thing we all accept is that the idea of remote working is what we now call as a meta phenomena. It's just an
Hmm.
accepted thing. It's a bit like mobile telephony. It's just there. It's not
Hmm.
something that you did as a choice or as an option or as a fun thing once in a while. It's something
Hmm.
that we all do now. So I think that's the one big thing. But back to you. I mean, so that's the, I think,
So tell
opening
me,
point I
Vikas,
wanted to
this
make.
is this is interesting. I just learned a new term from you, meta phenomena. The challenge of this crisis is, to my mind, the excessive working with technology. In all the other crises so far, somehow or the other, I think the human interactions have increased. Here, the social distancing thing has taken the human interactions away. How do you think excessive working with technology is playing out in terms of its impact on employee engagement?
Well, I think that, one is to your point, and I actually took notes. And for those of the people who would hear us on this conversation, Shakun asked me some very difficult questions to think about. So I had to make an effort to really think about what's really changing. I think when you look at excessive technology, now one is, to an extent, people are thanking technology.
Hmm.
If it didn't exist, our lives would be boring. Many jobs would simply disappear if there wasn't
Hmm.
a platform like a Zoom or Microsoft Teams. So to an extent, it's come with a sense of relief for people that there is a way we can kind of be at work. So that's the first thing. I think that more than anything else, before people get irritated with it, in this case, people are thanking it. The
Hmm.
idea of having technology, these assets at hand, which keep them socially and professionally connected and active during these times. So that's counterintuitive, because one of the things we'll hear on many conversations already is it's difficult and it's tiring and we've had enough. But I think the first thing is literally gratitude towards what technology is bringing. Um, the second thing is, I think many people have realized how easy it is to use to an extent. So for a while, people didn't know how to set up video conferences, and it would be almost a new skill set even for a senior managing director in a traditional firm. But we are all doing it. We see the prime minister doing it. So that's been, I think, the first thing. I think in terms of the fatigue that it sets in, or the role it plays in people's attention and time,
Hmm.
taken and other things. Those are trends that are still emerging. We think that these are still not the earliest, but early days still, because it could be a
Hmm.
long haul. So that would be my, my one comment towards
So
it to
tell
begin with.
me, I remember we used to use one slide which used to show what an engaged employee looks like. In the current context, what does an engaged employee look like, Vikas?
Well, I think in the current context, there are a couple of things. One is, I think an engaged employee is somebody who's fairly has a fairly close ear to the ground. Now, be it their customers, be it even their own leaderships, because there is a chance of simply disappearing in oblivion. You could just not have access. You may have technology issues. You could just switch off your video, and therefore, you're not really there, so to speak.
Hmm.
So, one most visible, I think, manifestation of an engaged employee is that they're visible and they're aware of what's going on. And
Hmm.
for that, I think, compared to earlier times, you would be kind of walking the aisle, or as we would call the water cooler top. That's disappeared. The other, I think, expression of engaged employees is people who, in a way, manage their work and life quite well at this point. I agree with Shakun, and I was saying this on another call, that work-life balance as a concept has evaporated. So we need to
Hmm.
find a new term for it. You know,
Hmm.
Simply using the same expression of work-life balance almost doesn't hold at this point. So people who manage that well, I think they don't look hugely challenged, but people who essentially have a very close ear to the ground in their own way, I
Hmm.
think are two strong behaviors to
Hmm.
my mind.
So this is interesting because yesterday I was talking to a couple of people on another panel with Economic Times, one of those HR forums there. One very interesting thing, a very senior leader said that in our organization, we were earlier insisting that people should be there on their video. Then the video fatigue started coming in, and now we have said, okay, don't worry about it. Switch off the video. But the paradigm, what you are saying, it's interesting that why would that fatigue come in? And we're going back to that feeling of timelessness. If I am here right now, if I am fully engrossed in this conversation, then there is no need for me to switch off video because I don't have a distraction. Of course, unless and until it's a practical distraction in my place of work, which is my house right now. So that's a secondary issue. But interestingly, there also I have seen a lot of time kids coming in and joining Zoom calls, and it's become a norm, right? I still remember many years ago, because you would also know there was this person getting interviewed at BBC or something, and suddenly the kid walks in, and then the maid is running. It was very good, the person was very calm, and it was talk of the town, so to say. But now it's perfectly all right, right? Kids and people are walking around. It's fine because that's how we live life, right? That's okay. So then, what we are saying is that the manifestation of engagement here is that the technology fatigue, the Zoom fatigue, will be much lower when an employee is engaged and more ear to the ground, as you say.
Well, I would add a concept to that. One is, engagement is clearly a productive energy, an emotional connect which can be harnessed into productive workplace actions. But before anything else, I'm actually reminded of how things look warm when you suddenly see a family member or a pet come into the picture. And I remember from many years back, there was a picture of John F. Kennedy working in the White House, and his son was playing under the table, and
Yes,
he didn't know.
that's an
So
epic
it's
picture.
and so those things kind of give us access to family and social life. And now what we are seeing is you see a lot more of that. Now earlier
Hmm.
people would know of spouses and maybe children. Now you actually see them. You also realize that people have parents with them, or they have a
Hmm.
burly second cousin also staying with them because they can't go
Hmm.
anywhere else. So there's a deeper familial access. Now to the point of fatigue, it's natural. uh, I think Zoom or technology fatigue is not different from the pain of commute every day, which is
Yeah,
something that
yeah.
you live with. It's a thing that we worked around. I think the thing that we are learning is that the idea of employee engagement is also getting extended into something that Shakun is familiar with, the deeper idea of well-being. So when you look at people's health, and you look at their emotional states and their social well-being, those things also start to play out. And I think because your social connect is right now through the screen actually does a lot. So once in a while, not judging people's engagement through access to video, but really their well-being, that look, I just want to stretch a little, and therefore excuse me for a moment, or I'll get my coffee on a long call, and therefore I can switch off my video. Those sensitivities are important.
Yeah.
And I've even seen in meetings something we never thought of earlier, that after 30 minutes, people say, okay, let's take a break. Now, what we've learned is you actually need a longer break from a screen, because you take it off for a minute. 5 minutes in real time and 7-8 minutes here is important, because people switch off, they do something else. So taking some kind of a physical break or a air break or something like that, and just standing out in the balcony and getting some sunlight, those
Very
things are getting
interesting.
more and more embedded in people's thinking. And I think that to cut a long story short, this should not just be the agenda of uh, one kind of a person in a company. I think even leaders should take ownership with this.
Yeah. No, I think that's very interesting. Vikas, on this whole concept of Generation R, you and I extensively discussed multiple things, and thanks for contributing it to that research also. From Generation R's perspective, what is your prediction? What is likelihood to be the engageability of this generation that we are calling Generation R, which is not specifically demographics based, but based on the fact their behaviors and their habits have significantly been recalibrated during this period?
So I think that one is, I personally liked this whole idea of Generation R, or the idea of resilience uh, in these times, to be a idea that you can build hope around, that people have sustained through these times and they've overcome this. I think in terms of the way this looks to me from a future perspective, uh, would be based on finally the events that people go through. So there would be one population which, by the end of this epidemic, um, is likely to be struggling significantly. So a lot of their resilience would be put to test. Uh, there could be another group which is kind of back to work in a simple way, which is people who are kind of just went through, as one would call, as a long and a bad episode. So therefore their resilience is built for the next time. So one is people whose resilience
Yeah.
is being tested even further. The others are the
Mm.
ones who go back and they feel that, look, we did something, and therefore they'll continue with
Mm.
it. The third could be people who actually could use this resilience to actually become even more agile.
Mm.
So
Mm.
that's the third population. Some are people who just kind of lost weight during this time, and hopefully they'll sustain. There could be others
Mm.
who've just sort of learned something else. So beyond just getting fit, let's say if you picked up a
And
martial art as well, so something like that would be the thriving around resilience.
and I know, and I think this is the right time for me to tell it to the world. I and Vikas used to work together 10 years ago, perhaps more than that. That was the time when Vikas bought a violin, and he used to get fascinated by new opportunities to learn. And that time I told him that, yeah, you've got another gig, we'll do it a couple of days, and you will not do it. I'm very happy that last week Vikas told me that finally he's learned to play violin. Is that the same violin that you bought at that time,
Yeah,
Vikas, or you bought a
it's the
new
same
piece?
violin. It's the same violin.
Yeah, good.
So,
Maybe time permitting, I'll request you to play a little note with us, if
well,
not
I
now.
think that may break the resilience of many who might be hearing us. But I did not tell him, but I also played for him. But again, those could have been things that helped us sort of maintain our well-being during those times. But clearly, for me, it's something that I've become better at. It's something that I treat that more in the sustainability thing. I had a question for you. Which
Hmm.
you work a lot with technology, and we spoke of what would engagement in these times look like. My question to you is, what would the future engaged employee look like? Because now we've got technology, we've got remote working, we've got all these maybe changes which are still going to unfold over a longer course. So what would the future state of engagement or active workers in the workplace look like, even if you don't want to use the word engagement, let's say?
No, I think I'll tell you, because first of all, the basic tenets of engagement, and because there are a lot of Gallup books right there, the say the fundamental construct of Gallup or even other constructs will stay very very relevant. However, the way those things will get manifested will change. I think first of all, the future engaged employee would be very, very comfortable with ambiguity. And he or she is likely to be far more resourceful than today. In the earlier era, it was said that ultimately it's the organization's responsibility as well as the manager's primary responsibility to ensure the engagement and well being of people. But today, I think the world is moving more and more towards self reliance, Atmanirbharta, and I think uh, the most engaged employees will be the ones who, because of their self initiative, will find a way to navigate. Monday blues of non-engaged employees will turn into Zoom blues of non-engaged employees. But the pull towards working and workmates for engaged employees and push away from work and work environments for disengaged employees is going to continue the way it is. I think the role of manager will further diminish as we get into virtual teams, as we get into more and more uh, heterogeneous teams, and that therefore will have its thing. Lastly, I think we talked about work tribes. In the new work tribe, the cross cultural appreciation would be much more higher, simply because now we are interacting and seeing people in their personal lives, right? You and I are speaking from our homes right now, so there is a much more deeper connect. And you talked about this much earlier. What will not change is the fundamental need of belonging, the fundamental need of staying relevant, the fundamental need of learning something and changing. The last thing I would say, we used to say that in the earlier times, 3 years is an ambient time for somebody to be in a role and look at from growth perspective. That horizon will significantly shift and shrink. People would want to uh, change roles or try and explore new things much earlier. I would not be surprised if the shelf life of some of the roles, some of the assignments is sub 1 year also going forward. So those are the 4 5 things, because I think that's going to definitely.
Yeah,
Now before
I
I
had
go,
I had a thought on that. If I can add, two
Mhm.
things. One is, to your point on the organizations structurally changing, which is remote working, and it's a structural thing. I think it is possible that there is increased matrix working because command and control is going to reduce, compared to a
Hmm.
microscopic check-in of people on a minute-to-minute basis and physically seeing what they're doing. I think that's going to change. You
So
simply can't keep track of
it's
every
interesting, and
activity.
it's interesting because, and I remember our massive arguments and discussions around this whole concept of, in the last 7 days, have I received recognition or praise for doing good work? I believe out there today there would be millions of people who have not seen that happen in the last 100 days. Forget about 7 days. As this uh, uh, micromanagement, or I would say more mindful management, is going down, how what is your advice? What is it that, what are the risks or what are the pitfalls that some of the leaders and managers might fall in? Because I got a very interesting conversation going on with one of my teammates, who incidentally is a very senior professional. He said, you know what, I suddenly felt left out because you and I didn't speak for 15 days. That won't happen in our office environment because invariably we'll bump into each other somewhere. and suddenly, because I thought everything is going on, nothing was on Zoom or scheduled on calendar, and I could sense that he felt miserable, and he said that I need a little more time with you. So, what are your advice, and what is your what are some red flags that people need to keep in mind?
Yeah, I think two, three things. One is, I think what you said on recognition, I think, as we said, the needs endure. The need for frequent praise, appreciation, support, and so on endure. It says that in times of disruption, the way it will look and the mechanism of delivery will change. That's one. The second is, I think, managers or leaders continue to be important, but they have to clearly play a more supportive coach-like role. So as we say, boss to coach, that's one of the general ideas, that if you're just trying to do a command and control, that's not going to work. I think in terms of things to do versus things to not do, one thing that I personally believe in is leaders should continue to ask good questions all the time of their teams, contextually relevant. Not just asking general questions that, as things are transitioning around their roles or resources available to them, or technology as they adopt more technology, asking contextually good questions is important. The second is, I think, showing the real picture rather than offering platitudes that everything will be
Hmm.
fine. And I think that doesn't really work. It's a more long staying reality, and a grim one at that. So people
Hmm.
actually virtually go across to each other and hunt for the truth. So don't make that difficult. I think that would be the second. The third is, I think there is a idea of building communities even virtually, which is that you can build task forces. So if you say, okay, there is a go to everybody kind of an initiative for something, then let people get involved, give people an opportunity, and do not be as selective as you were in earlier times for skills and all that. Just sort of
Hmm.
get people to what to come together, and which is what in many times in distress situations, when people come together, is known as the rallying effect. So people just start rallying together if they think that something good is going to happen, such as like a neighborhood watch, or people minding each other a little bit. And finally, I believe that compared to only looking at uh, opinions of people once every year, or like an annual health checkup, I think these are time for more frequent pulses,
Hmm.
more
Correct.
frequent connects, qualitatively and quantitatively. So rather than
Hmm.
just coming once in a while, one can be a lot more available to people
Hmm.
through this through through
Great.
through these times. That's what I feel. I think.
No, I think these are interesting things, and because you started by saying that a lot of people out there are feeling grateful that technology is there. You and I, over the last 10 years, planned multiple times that we will meet
Yeah.
and have a conversation like this. Today, I'm grateful that because of this technology, we are able to have it. Right? We imagine we've been planning for 10 years and it didn't happen because we had in the mind, we'll find a time, we'll find a place, we will travel, we'll go there, and so on and so forth. So I think my big takeaway from today is being grateful for the technology. Second, I think this whole technology fatigue, and your point of view around this is very, very relevant for the audience. I think, as I said, as we started this conversation, that nobody knows engagement better than Vikas. Vikas is also an expert on behavioral economics, an alumni of the London School of Economics, and I'm really grateful, Vikas, that you found time for this conversation. If you all want to get connected with Vikas or get into this deeper conversation, leave a comment here and we'll come back to you. Vikas, thank you so much once again. I've relived the old days with you today. Thank you so much, brother.
Thank you so much. And the virtual meeting, of course, also tells us that there is no substitute for physical meeting eventually for human beings. So we also wish to keep a promise for that. But thank you for having me and listening.
Great. Thank you so much, Vikas. Have a good day.
Thank you.